Prior to joining NGFA in 2007, Jess was a program analyst at OSHA's Office of Outreach Services and Alliances. He received his undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University and his master's from George Washington University. Please welcome Jess McCluer.
Thanks, Greg. All right. It's always a fun topic to get an update on OSHA. I'm sure you can't wait to hear. So I will try and keep it short. I know some of you have probably heard some of the information in these presentations before. I obviously want to keep the floor open to questions and discussion with the excellent presentations that Jim and Dave had in the NFPA standards. But I think the primary reason is obviously we want to try and tie this all together is that with what Jim was saying too about the NFPA standards, what we have a concern about and what we're uncertain about is what is OSHA going to be doing with these NFPA standards once they are developed. Are they going to incorporate by reference or simply cut and paste and use that language that comes out of the NFPA and use it for their own proposals? And considering the situation we're dealing now with the globally harmonized standard for labeling, you know, that's something that we have to keep under consideration. So real quick here, just for those of you that aren't aware, obviously the industry has been under the spotlight, so to speak, with OSHA for the last several years. And if you see from fiscal year 09 till the end of the last fiscal year, there's been a steady increase, so to speak, in the number of programmed inspections within the grain handling industry. And programmed inspections being with the regional and local emphasis programs. Essentially, if OSHA is not investigating a fatality, an employee complaint, or some type of worker injury, they'll have your facility on their list. And so it's not a matter of if they're going to come and inspect you, it's when. And so this kind of shows you here on the number of total violations issued and percent of programmed inspections throughout the industry. I know this is old data. It's from the end of the last fiscal year. I still haven't received the new data yet on the current status for fiscal year 13, but I don't think there's much of a difference. And this just shows here the regional and local emphasis programs. Obviously, many of you come from the states within these areas, and I know some of the state programs, some of the state plan states have also incorporated state emphasis programs for the grain handling industry. And the dates on these programs just show when the dates were enacted. Many of them have been, for the fiscal year 2012, they started them up again too. And this shows here the based on the inspections. These are the top items that are cited at a grain handling facility. So obviously the grain handling facility standard is the #1 item, but if you also look, you can see hazard communication, the permit required confined spaces, which I'll talk about, mechanical power transmission apparatus, which I believe has to do with the powering of equipment such as a sweep auger, which is a fun topic we've been dealing with for the last several years too. So here are the top issues that we're currently dealing with the agency right now, whether it be through enforcement or through the rulemaking process. And I'll just cover these pretty quickly here. And just curious, I mean, how many of your facilities have been inspected by OSHA in this room? Yeah, so pretty much most of you. How many of you have received this permit required confined space boot pit citation? Have any of you received that? Okay. Well, it's been an issue that's been going on. I think you're all pretty familiar with the boot pit, but I just had to throw that in there, but just in case. But basically, these citations that OSHA has been issuing, they've been going out to facilities, and as I've been understanding it from the members, saying that they'll just open up a hatch over by a leg or any part near the elevator itself and say, that's a permit required confined space. And that's essentially the citation that they're being issued. And it's like, well, that's a boot pit. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter, a boot pit's a permit required confined space. It's like, really? That's debatable. There's obviously there's not a specific definition for a boot pit, very similar to this guarded, unguarded issue that the industry had to deal with sweep augers. And there's a lot of issues that you have to consider with the boot pit. I mean, obviously, the definition of confined space, regarding continuous human occupancy or limited or restricted egress, I mean, there's a lot of those different types of factors that you have to consider, whether it's actually a permit required confined space versus a boot pit. And so what's going on right now is we've had discussions with OSHA trying to find out where they're coming from on this, because this is essentially like the sweep auger issue. It's an interpretation. And many of these inspectors that go out and issue the citation, it's not like they actually open the hatch and go down into the tunnel and see that, you know, there's 150 feet of tunnel and a conveyor, and it's not really an actual confined space. So NGFA, our Safety, Health, Environmental Quality Committee, we've put together basically a procedures document, a draft procedures document that we'd like to get final approval from the association, and something we'd like to distribute out to our members and take a proactive approach as suggested procedures that members may want to take in addressing the permit required confined space boot pit issue. And as we all know, that we had to deal with these letters of interpretation with OSHA, and we were kind of caught off guard with that. And the thought is on this is take a proactive approach and see what OSHA's response is going to be. So that's something that's in progress right now. The other issue, as I'm sure many of you all are very aware of, is the sweep auger issue that apparently we've gotten this issue, I think, I think fundamentally resolved. I mean, I think the two key issues that came out of this, that after a letter of interpretation came out, that OSHA was coming out and they're essentially saying that if the front of the auger is not guarded, it's considered an unguarded auger, and you can't be inside the bin with an auger running. I mean, those are the two key issues, and they're interviewing employees and issuing citations. And so because of that, you know, we had numerous discussions with the agency trying to get this issue resolved too, and it finally took an actual legal case where an NGFA member company went to court, and basically through a settlement that they had set up, as they call it, the 10 points of light, or the 10 sweep auger safety principles that OSHA later incorporated into a memorandum out to their regional offices. So I think the key issue here with these safety principles is number 7, and using engineering controls to prevent contact with the auger. And primarily these engineering controls are something that from the industry standpoint, we were recommending to OSHA when this entire issue started 5 years ago. And these engineering controls being something such as a kill switch or a handlebar or something to that effect that could be added to the auger while it is the employees inside the bin with it. And so based on the settlement discussion that OSHA had with the company, this was incorporated, and later OSHA used these safety principles into a memo to its regional administrators, basically providing quote-unquote guidance to their inspectors. So there's no guarantee. I mean, there's subtle differences between the actual court settlement with the member company and this memorandum, but I think the two key items that we've been trying to get clarification on, what is considered guarded, and can you be in the bin if the auger is running. Those two, I think, are resolved here, and it says that you can. You have to have certain procedures you have to follow, but I think that they're reasonable. And so we've been trying to schedule a meeting, NGFA has, with OSHA to get some clarification to make sure we're all on the same page and have a clear understanding regarding the memorandum. But I think overall this issue has been resolved, and that's where I think from the industry standpoint, you go back to this permit required confined space boot pit issue, and there's been a lot of thought that, well, maybe this is kind of the new sweep auger issue, that maybe this is OSHA going out to the facilities and just issuing these citations, and there's not really, it's an interpretation based on, or not based on an actual standard. So the other item too, another big issue, and obviously as a follow-up to what Jim was talking about here, is this combustible dust. And I think, as we all know, OSHA came out with the combustible dust, as they say, a notice of proposed rulemaking back in 2010. NGFA and several other trade groups responded saying, we're happy with what we have. We have the grain handling standard. It's been in effect since 1988, and it's, you've seen the results. The number of incidents has significantly decreased. And so we don't need to be part of any type of general industry standard. And so that goes into what OSHA realized when they started going through this process of trying to develop a general industry standard. They realized that there's obviously a wide variety of materials and processes and equipment. A grain elevator versus a petrochemical facility are vastly different. And the type of material that they use to develop those products and truly defining what dust is very difficult. In addition, you have numerous NFPA standards for each of these dusts. So what did OSHA do? Well, in our opinion, there's several other vehicles that the agency is trying to use or has used at this point to regulate combustible dust. One of them, this proposed walking working surface proposed rule, which I'll also discuss, that's designed primarily for fall protection. But they put a proposal in there to modify the general housekeeping section of the 1900 standard to make excessive layers of dust a slip, trip, and fall hazard. That was in the proposed rule. There's also the chemical hazard category in the GHS standard. And is the injury and illness prevention program. Well, if you have the injury and illness prevention program, I2P2, if that moves through, you won't even need OSHA. Because, essentially that'll be every employer's responsibility from preventing any type of incident from occurring, so you won't need any type of regulations to administer that. And then, of course, you have NFPA's new standard on combustible dust that Jim mentioned. The CSB meeting I attended last week, and basically at the Chemical Safety Board meeting, there was the Chemical Safety Board voted and recommended that combustible dust be the most wanted safety improvement for OSHA. And essentially the meeting was OSHA has not done enough to address combustible dust. They went through all the reports that they had, such as on imperial sugar and some of the other pharmaceutical plants that had combustible dust incidents, and they said, OSHA, you're not doing enough to address this issue. Those that were present to support this, there were families of those that have been killed in the incidents, and there were 7 trade unions. There was a representative there from the Grain Millers Union that said that the grain handling standard was not designed for combustible dust. And they said that it hasn't been effective. And I sat there and watched, and I was like, that's interesting. There was also representatives from ASSC and NFPA there strongly supporting CSB's approach. So it was the first time such a designation had been made. So there's obviously, as Jim mentioned, a lot of politics involved here with the combustible dust issue and a lot of pressure for OSHA to put out a rule, which goes to this globally harmonized standard for labeling. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the GHS for labeling? Okay. Well, in this rule, the final rule that came out, OSHA classified combustible dust as a chemical hazard. And they specifically said, as it says on here, shipments of products that could produce, and this is verbatim from the standard, shipments of products that could produce combustible dust, e.g. whole grain, when used in processing or where dust is produced, is subject to the new rule. Okay? So that meant if you handled whole grain, which I think that pretty much covers most of this audience here, you are going to have to comply with the standard. Okay? And what that means is like if the material safety data sheets, they've changed names and added some new requirements, which I'll show, which means that you are going to have to put combustible dust on your safety data sheet and identify and describe how you're going to mitigate that hazard. And we're not talking combustible dust just within 35 feet of the bucket elevator. According to this standard, that could be combustible dust anywhere within the facility, which is why we decided to take some legal action on this issue, because this issue, this classification of combustible dust, was not in the proposed rule. And I think this goes back to this whole politics that Jim mentioned. When OSHA saw the complexity of developing a general standard for combustible dust, they thought, well, we have the standard about ready to come out. Why don't we just stick it in here? And that's our thought. We had settlement negotiations. We were involved in sitting down with OSHA and trying to discuss this, and they said from the beginning that combustible dust is not coming out of this rule. So this means that the safety data sheet, these are the categories within the safety data sheet that you all are responsible for now. So these new safety data sheet requirements, that means on December 1 of this year, if OSHA comes into your facility for an inspection, you're going to have records showing what you've done to train your employees on the new GHS standard requirements. And that means you're going to have to know or have a definition for combustible dust. So I guess you can kind of see how why we're legally involved in that, because there's about 4 different definitions for combustible dust. You have NFPA 61, NFPA 654, you have the grain handling standard, and you have their combustible dust emphasis program. So I guess you have to pick and choose which one you want to use for what data sheet. And it also, according to OSHA, the grain handling industry is a manufacturer of combustible dust. So when we had our discussions with OSHA, we said, don't you mean the farmer? Doesn't the farmer grow it? I mean, come on. How do we manufacture the dust when the corn and the soybean comes from the farmer? And I mean, we're not trying to have them regulated. We were just trying to make the point. And they said, no, dust comes from elevators. So that's kind of, I'm just saying, that's the mentality. That's what we're dealing with here. And the fact is that you throw in NFPA in there, and everything that we're dealing with. I serve on the 61 committee, and as Jim mentioned, it was a pretty knockdown, drag-out fight with NFPA. And you have a lot of these special experts that they want these ridiculous dust levels of a 64th of an inch, 100th of an inch. These esoteric formulas with area and volume, dust thickness. I mean, this is what they want to incorporate, and this is what we're dealing with out there. And I know people don't really think about it. They say, well, we're already regulated. We have our grain handling standard. You know, they're not going to touch us. Well, that's not necessarily true, and we could still be impacted by it. Another fun issue, rolling stock fall protection. Real quickly here on this item. OSHA cited the Federal Grain Inspection Service. They cited the Federal Grain Inspection Service for being on top of a rail car without fall protection. They cited the facility the FGIS was working at for allowing FGIS to be on top of the rail car without fall protection. So I think we're all very familiar with the 1996 Miles memo. It essentially says that fall protection is not required unless you are adjacent or contiguous to the loading area, okay? So that means primarily if you're within 3 to 6 rail cars of the loading area, then that's when fall protection would be required. If you're, say, 20 cars out, doing sampling, doing something, opening the hatches, getting ready to do the sampling, fall protection is not required, according to the memo. So FGIS was cited, a federal agency. In the settlement, OSHA dropped the violation of the Miles memo citation. However, they kept the citations that said FGIS did not do proper hazard assessment. So you didn't violate the Miles memo, but you didn't do proper hazard assessment. Makes perfect sense. So what FGIS is dealing with right now is FGIS is trying to work with OSHA to find out, okay, well, we're going to provide you with some scenarios that we have to deal with every single day in sampling grain and weighing grain, and you tell us where we should have fall protection or not. And so FGIS, obviously, they're working with industry very closely on this to get this issue resolved. As far as the fall protection, as far as the rulemaking process goes, OSHA came out with a proposed rule in 2010, and they essentially said the 1996 Miles memo is outdated and needs to be replaced. And they had a questions in a proposed rule. And considering what we've had to deal with in this combustible dust issue, I would not be surprised if when they come out with this final rule, as they say in November, they might have something on fall protection. We'll have to wait and see. But as Greg mentioned too, as far as the press goes, National Public Radio, there's links here to numerous stories that they had on the grain handling industry in March. Obviously, you know, as you can see here, they obviously didn't have a very nice picture to paint, so to speak, of the industry. Even a little segment on should grain bins on farms be regulated too. The Center for Public Integrity is essentially NPR's think tank. They were involved in making that story. Kansas City Star, PBS, New York Times, they've all had stories about the industry, many of them involving fatalities, but also many of these have been about incidents that have occurred on farms too. All right, and that's the other thing that occurs. Most of the people involved in this from a regulatory standpoint, you hear grain bin, you know, they don't make a distinction between a farm and a commercial facility. And I think we all know the tragic events that occur either place, but, you know, oftentimes the industry is lumped in with what occurs at a farm. And that's the distinction that we're trying to make and trying to work with the producer groups. NGFA has numerous training materials, and there's flyers out there at the registration desk. If you have any questions, let me know, and appreciate your time. I know we're running a little over schedule here.